Welcome back to Beyond Four Walls, Conversations on Affordable Housing. I'm David Dworkin, President and CEO of the National Housing Conference, the nation's oldest and broadest affordable housing coalition. I'm joined today by Patrick Dodd, President and CEO of Cotality, formerly known as CoreLogic, which uses real-time property data and insights to help agents, lenders, insurers, and innovators uncover risks, seize opportunities, and drive meaningful impact across the property ecosystem. We'll learn a lot more about what all that means and how it works in a moment. Since stepping into the CEO role in 2022, Patrick has been instrumental in reshaping the company's vision and operations. He originally joined as its Chief Operating and Growth Officer, driving forward key initiatives like Cotality's global cloud migration, advanced data and analytics replatforming, and the introduction of groundbreaking tools, including the ARIA platform and climate risk analytics. Before joining Cotality, Patrick served as Global President and Chief Commercial Officer of Nielsen's Global Connect division, with leadership roles in Asia, Europe, and North America. Welcome, Patrick. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
It's an absolute pleasure to see you again, David, and to join you for this conversation today.
Well, I'm fascinated by your career and the work you're doing at Cotality, and I am a regular user of your data. It is always valuable, and so I'm a fan and kind of a customer, or maybe a freeloader, but I also love the fact that you were at Nielsen from 1991 to 2018. That is quite a career and quite a interesting background to bring into financial services and housing data. Give me a sense of how has that informed, that incredible experience informed the work you're doing now?
Yeah, thanks, David. And one of your comments earlier, we do have a platform at Cotality, what we call Data for Good. So we don't see it as freeloading, by the way.
Oh, good.
There's certain areas, because this is a fabulous industry that I've fallen into the last 4 years. There's many of my client partners and others that have been here around a long time. It's a terrific industry. So first off, back to your question. What's interesting is when I first started in my career in Toronto, Canada, I'm a Canadian. I joined this company thinking, whoa, what an interesting company. And I thought it would be a good starter company. A lot of other of my friends and colleagues were going into banking or joining packaged goods companies. You have to think of the early 90s academy companies. So I think people thought I was a little odd joining this market research company at the time. But what was really interesting to me, I think I started at a really interesting time, because for those people that might know Nielsen, there's two big parts of our business back then. One is obviously television ratings that has moved to total audience ratings now, because you do not want to just measure television anymore. So we had to get ready for that seismic shift in how consumers consume media across lots of platforms. And
in that case, seismic is an understatement. I mean,
when you really think about it, because to be a TV's ratings company, I will say, you don't want to be a king of a dead planet at the end of the day, because you want to really think about as many eyeballs as possible. But the more interesting thing was I joined at a time where I just saw this whole industry that was so analog in so many ways, because we were still back in the early 90s collecting paper diaries, believe it or not, from households. And I was one of those people that was put on a little skunkworks team as I graduated to say, why don't we put this? It was not a small computer. It was kind of this large box. It looked more like a large Nintendo box called the People Meter. Now you can imagine it's a chip that goes into people's homes and all opt-in by our panel. But I really just saw the benefits of how data can be moved from an analog to a digital phase. And I have the same analogy, by the way, on retailing and the UPC code of scanning groceries, because a lot of people were doing that work with lots of touch points, lots of humans, getting to the point where we even had to have a standard against a code and making sure that cashiers were scanning it properly. So each item for inventory management was managed. And I fell in love with this, by the way, because it was really a disruption for our clients, also where Nielsen's growth was going to come from. And that kind of kept me going across 100 countries in the world, David, because my career took me to, it was
Everywhere.
Canada, ran some of our US business, ran Europe, out to China, which you can imagine what was happening with e-commerce, with Alibaba. But it was all about digital transformation of analog businesses. So I think as I look at why when the CoreLogic board at the time, because we were a public company,
Right.
gave me a call, I had studied the company from afar. I'd look at the size of the asset class, the brands that were playing in it,
Hmm.
and I said, this sounds interesting. I was pretty happy living in Geneva, Switzerland, by the way.
Yeah.
But when this opportunity came up and I got involved in the company, I've fallen in love with both the company and the clients in the industries we serve because while there's a lot of great progress on technology and around real estate, insurance, servicing, lending, there's still a big opportunity. And I think Cotality has the underpinning to play our small part in that moving forward. So that's probably where I draw
Yeah.
some of the parallels.
And you ask anybody about housing, and you're usually going to find somebody who stumbled into housing from some other completely different area and just fell in love with housing. So you are in plenty of good company,
It is.
including myself.
I've been analyzing and working on data and tech in a lot of categories, as you can imagine, all kinds. This is by far the most interesting. I'm not going to use the word complex, but it is
Hmm.
complex
Yeah.
set of information and unstructured information that has an opportunity to be connected so much better for all. And it's not a bad time to be in the data business.
Sure isn't. It's a fascinating time. We're really at an inflection point. And I think that finance and housing, we've used a lot of data, but in the affordable housing space, I think we're really just coming into our adolescence on using and leveraging data to support affordable housing. And now with AI, everything is in rapid change mode, and data is the core of that. And I want to come back to that, but let's talk a little bit about Cotality, and we can start with the brand. CoreLogic was a great brand. A lot of people knew it and were familiar with it. I think anybody who goes through a branding change exercise is balancing, risk and opportunity and vision. Tell me a little bit about what were you thinking when you said, let's hit the reset button on our brand, and how did you land on Cotality?
Yeah. So it's actually 3 years this month when
Mhm.
I was asked to be the CEO 3 years ago. And so we were hard at work in that previous role that I had here, and I
Mhm.
got to learn a lot about the business. But because I was here a year before I was asked to take over the CEO position. And what was really interesting to me is I went on a big listening tour, as most executives should do, both with employee base as well as many, many clients. And it was quite interesting when I picked up on things. And CoreLogic had built their business over many, many years, very successful. It's been around 15 years, by the way. So that's how long the brand has been
Mhm.
the corporate name of the company. So teenage years. And it stood for a lot of good things, actually. The feedback I was getting on the brand, and it's not a bad name, by the way, Essential Knowledge, CoreLogic.
Mhm. Yeah.
It didn't box us in, all those kinds of things. What I did find is because the company was set up, we've been on a transformation journey the last 3 or 4 years. And a lot of it comes down to a company our size of busting silos, believe it or not, because
Mhm.
we were made up of a lot of different acquisitions. And there was good work being done even before I got here on integrating those businesses. But that was one of the things that came to me from our client base, David, as I talked to many of them, is a lot of people didn't quite understand what was inside of Cotality. They saw it as 20 or 30 little of CoreLogic, 20 or 30 different
Mhm.
businesses that were coming to them. And so I was given a lot of advice from a lot of the good people that you and I meet said, Pat, I don't think our team really understands the breadth of the capabilities in the company. That was number one. That penny dropped for me pretty quickly after about my 100th client one on one interview.
Interesting.
And so we had an awareness issue, but we also had some silo busting to do. And since that time, we've been on quite a journey, David. And I don't want to take too long on this, but we've been able to move our multi cloud tenant machine learning cloud from 10,000 servers to zero. We've built out our Array platform for all of our data in one central repository, no small task. So it was about last April where I was sitting with the board and talking about the from to. And I just said that I believe that this could be the right time to get a new handle on the company.
Mhm.
So we really took some time took about 6 or 7 months coming up with doing research. I'm a researcher at heart,
Yep.
doing focus groups internally, externally. And then we finally decided to launch the name to our employee base first, and away we went. And I'm very happy with the progress. And the biggest thing is, our business now is 20% international outside of the United States. Insurance is a very large sector for us, very different to our profile 10 years ago. Real estate, global business for us right now. And I think this can be a real catalyst for innovation now that we've put so much capital into infrastructure around our data. And that really gave me the courage. Plus, I had a great team in our marketing team that I knew
Mhm.
could also pull off something very professional that's so meaningful to so many people, because we wanted this to be an expression of how we were feeling on the inside for our employee base, that things have changed and we're on our front foot as it relates to innovation. And we just saw this as, we're not done in our transformation, but we just saw it as a big catalyst to help us keep driving that innovation forward. So sorry for the long, but
No.
it was not taken lightly, and we
Yeah.
had to work through a lot of things because this was a brand that was precious in Australia, the UK, through LATAM, across Canada, the US. So there was a lot of different constituents we had to, and our employees were a very big part of that, and they played a big role in it as well. So
I mean, these things can go very badly, and I think this went particularly well. It's probably no accident that, it comes from somebody with multiple decades of experience at Nielsen. But, I was talking to my AI bot the other day, and I said, I'd like to refer to you by name. And it said, well, you could call me Perplexity. And I said, I really want to give you a more personal name. And it said, well, here's some examples. And I said, well, that's good. I said, how about Perry? And its response was, "Oh, well, that's very clever. I like that." So when I look at Cotality and I see all the component parts of it, you've got
nice.
there's a lot going on there: totality and collaboration and connectivity, and then there's like a little tip of your hat to CoreLogic. It's
That co was quite important because this is
yeah,
this is about keeping all the best parts of CoreLogic and then just
mm-hmm,
pouring more innovation and more velocity into the company as a data and tech company that underpins the housing, the largest asset class in the world in many ways, right?
yeah.
So that's really what it's about.
Well, and I don't know that anybody but Facebook's founder refers to Facebook as Meta, but I will say that you guys, I was at a conference recently and one of your executives was on a panel and they had said CoreLogic. And what was interesting wasn't that they made the mistake with the tent card, was the number of people who noticed it and corrected it and said, "Oh, yeah, look at that. They got that wrong. They're called Cotality now." And just such a short period of time afterwards, I thought, well, that's the tell.
You know what? It's only 100 days since it was March
Wow.
24th when we went live. We had our employees, I can't believe it, under embargo for 90 days because
Yeah.
they're our biggest brand ambassadors in a way. But we're 100 days in, and it'll take a while to get there, but a year from now, it'll be hopefully a household name and bigger and better than ever.
Well, so let's talk about housing and the data. If I just said list all the ways that you guys work with data, we'd probably be here for an hour and a half. So let's just use that data and we can get into it as we talk about it. There's some new information, new data on housing prices. I think it's very interesting. We're starting to see a shift, but I'm not sure it means what it usually means. So talk to me a little bit about housing prices, what you see in the market now that might be different from a year ago, and what does that mean, this flattening that I think we're seeing in many markets?
It's interesting as you look at the information because when we're looking at the information right now, I like to take a balanced scorecard to data and take a long-term
Hmm.
view on these things because if you take a short-term view, you might be missing a few things. But even recently, if you look at it, one of the areas I was actually just out at our real estate conference. So
Yeah.
listings information was quite prominent because you can imagine with all the MLS executives and all the agents that we're dealing with. So I think this is a positive sign right now that we're seeing listings pick up and we're seeing not bad volumes in terms of number of listings going up there. And we are starting to see house prices still growing, but
Hmm.
at a slower growth rate than we've seen in the past. So a lot of the things that you and I have seen at the various conferences as you look through it. The interesting thing for me is I think the term affordability continues to be the punchline at the end of some of this
Right.
analysis, and that we have a bit of a K-shaped economy going on, not just in the stock market, but in the demographics of this country. But I will tell you, David, it's interesting. Affordable housing, this is not just a U.S. burning issue. It is a burning
Really?
issue north of the border in Canada. It is a burning issue across the United Kingdom. It is a burning issue, affordable and reasonable housing in Australia and New Zealand, right? The markets that we go quite deep
Yeah.
in. So for me,
And
it's
you
very,
have offices and work in all those markets, which I think is
yes.
interesting.
And
We
we
can
go
come back to that because I'm interested in some of your thoughts on
we do
how we
quite deep.
compare.
So I just maybe there's solutions. The more that we can look and widen the aperture,
Hmm.
I'm a huge believer in this. You never know what can help, even though that this is a very local game,
Yes.
as I've learned. But we are seeing a number of things. Home price growth is at the slowest pace of growth since 2012. We should look at that and keep watching that trend, right? So if you look at just the slowing of the growth, and that's good for buyers, right?
Right.
And real home price growth is now negative for the first time because finally we're seeing wages grow a little faster,
And that's the important number.
right? Because
We don't want to see housing prices crater or go down. I mean, yes, there would be more affordability, but there are lots of bad reasons why that happens. But the catching up is the key.
no, and that line that we've all been watching on
Hmm.
wage growth. Now, I think one of the things I love to do is, I guess because I'm a researcher at heart, I think national averages are somewhat interesting but misleading. I
Please.
even believe looking at the state level is interesting but misleading. And you get down to the county, okay, interesting. Let's get down to the zip code. Let's get down to the neighborhood. And that's really what Cotality is all about, by the
Yeah.
way. This kind of fills my boots when I get to look at our information right down at the granular level and then roll it back up because that really tells a better picture. And I do encourage industry, our clients to continue to double and triple click on the information
Sure.
because that's where the insights come out of these things, particularly on a category like this of housing.
Well, and the geospatial ability to look at this is, I think, essential, really.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about, I just want to go to one state because it's probably about the size of many counties in this country, Wyoming, in terms of population. Recently entered the top 5 states with the highest year-over-year home price growth. I can't think of a better argument to deal with the affordable housing crisis than the fact that they're having one in Wyoming.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
I know. And Boise, Idaho is another city where it's a big problem there. And that's both good and bad. It's bad because we have a big problem and it's getting bigger, but it's good because there are more important members of the Senate and the House who have come around to saying, we've got to deal with this. And I just met with the congressman who chairs the housing subcommittee and is from Lincoln, Nebraska. And we mapped some numbers for him, and it's a big deal in Lincoln and just like anywhere else.
Yeah. So, David, could you mind? I know we're going back and forth in a conversation.
Yeah.
I really look at this real home price growth often
Yeah.
and in different ways, and I cut it. What other metrics do you, particularly given what you and your organization do, what do you think are the other key metrics that are
Well,
most critical as we are trying to come up with solutions? Because I'm a huge believer is if you don't have the baseline information and you don't really measure it, it's really hard to come up with really practical solutions on this.
this is a conversation, not an interview. And I always am curious that it's pretty rare that people ask me questions.
Well,
And that's a great question. I appreciate it. So some of the things I look at are the law of supply and demand is never repealed. So production numbers are really important. What's happening? Where is that happening? Why isn't it happening in some places? I know you all have done some research on home size, and that's interesting to me. I think it's a bit of a lagging indicator. I think that we're spending a lot of time paying attention to what trade and immigration, what's happening there and how that's impacting housing production. And this real problem that I think affects the availability of homes for first-time homebuyers, which is the freezing of the move-up market.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in what you think about that because on the one hand, you've got homes that are being built, and that's very important. But on the other hand, you have this whole move-up market that is frozen in many ways because so many people have 3 and 4% mortgages, and the cost of moving up just isn't worth it. And so those are the homes that oftentimes a first-time home buyer will see, oh, that's my first house.
Yeah. We have a lot of these numbers at Cotality in terms of forecasting what we believe the move-up buyers, or frankly, even the refi opportunity is for people as they think about that, because that just builds confidence.
Yeah.
That there's movement in these things. And the way that I look at the numbers, and also my view of how I've been studying the market, is I think there is a little bit of a new normal setting in terms of higher for longer. It doesn't solve the affordability number in terms of the gap there, but just a little bit more movement down in some of those interest rates. I believe it'll open that up and start to get the market moving, by the way. So it'll be quite interesting by, let's call it, the peak home buying season in 2026. I know people were
Okay.
hoping for it in 2025.
Yeah, well.
But I have a feeling, particularly those people at 2 or 3, tough. Those people at 4, 5, and 6, because of household formation, we all know what those things are, how people think about things. That'll open things up. And
we're playing in a range between 6.5 and 7 right now. What do you think is a break point for us? What should I be looking at?
Yeah, I would call it 5.7 to 6.2.
Okay. So 6 is probably if we break 6, I think there's a psychological thing. It's weird, but when I got my first house, it was 10, and I paid a quarter of a point to actually get it down under 10 so I could brag about having a 9 point whatever percent mortgage. There's a weird psychology to that.
Yeah. It'll take some time to get there, but my sense is, listen, I'm a big supply demand, and I
Yeah.
know that households are changing formation, and it's a different generation of people and things, but I think some of the fundamental aspects of family formation and what happens with families as they go through different generational shifts are going to win the day at the end of the day, if you really look over the long term here. I think there are some short-term changes. I still believe a lot of it's affordability, because I believe that next generation, if they can really build up that courage to say,
Yeah.
this is just part of my assets that is just going to help build wealth, bring a better life to them, no matter what their household is. I'm still a believer in those things. And even though people are different today, I don't think it's that different.
So you all actually do a fair amount of research on different generational cohorts. And definitely when we look at millennials and Gen Zs, they're an interesting set of generations, very different experiences, although it doesn't seem like that to those of us who are baby boomers and Gen Xers. The reality for them is it's quite different. And what are as the Gen Zs really move squarely into home buying age, and millennials who are not currently home buyers have this pent-up demand, how are you looking at these generational issues, and what is the data teaching you?
Yeah, from the information we're seeing right now, I do see that if you think of just the age and the ability to really think about putting down the down payment of
Mm-hmm.
what they need, and with the rising cost of some of just maintaining and owning a home, it is a bit more of a head scratcher than perhaps for you and I 20 years ago. When you take the time to do the math, it's on the bubble right now over the last couple of years where home prices are. There's no doubt about it, and where things are right now. So I do think education and financial education is quite important.
Mm-hmm.
When you start looking at things over a 10-year period, David, what is the cost of, assuming you're not living with mom and dad or bunking with 6 or 7 people,
Yeah.
just the cost of renting versus the cost of home ownership and that wealth that can be created. And I think the industry is doing a good job on this, but I think there's more that we can do to make it easier for people to see that math and work through it. I'm going to give you a couple numbers, David, that I
Yeah.
asked the team to deal in, that I'm not sure if it's going to surprise you or not, but it gave me a little. I like looking for both sides, but the optimistic side, because
Mm-hmm.
when I started looking at some of the industry consumer data in the industry, I was hearing a lot of things about that the first time home buyer in this country, it used to be 10 years ago, the average age was 29 or 30,
Right.
and now it's moved up to 38.
Wow.
That
That's a big jump.
that was a heart-wrenching one for me.
Yeah.
Because when you think about that time in life and what's going on, if it's gone that way, and that's a national number, right? So I actually went back and I peeled through this. Now, that information, I'm a huge believer in good research, and this is good
Mm-hmm.
research, I am sure, but it is sample based. It's been done for many years, so the industry has a nice trend. But I do believe Cotality sits on a little bit of a truth set. So I asked my data science team to go through all the mortgage application data for the last 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? And look at that information. And it actually brought me hope because as I looked at that, what I call our data set, that number's only 32 and it's not moved that much actually.
Oh, interesting. Is
So
that because of the pandemic throws off some of that analysis,
I,
or is it
I
just,
I'm a huge believer in sampling and sample
yeah,
size and doing these things, but you have to think about how those happen over time as opposed to using big data sets.
yeah,
And I actually think these data sets should be looked at together in some way. So it's not just Cotality, but before we jump to conclusions on headlines, I think it's quite important to look around the corner and saying, because that trend was shocking to me, to be honest. When I
sure.
saw that 29 to
And I've
38,
heard that
I
too.
know it's going to catch headlines. So this one gave me a little bit of hope. But what's interesting is you peel
Mm-hmm.
back the onion, the number is higher in a place like Los Angeles, where it's 36.
Right.
And in New York, it's 35, but it's still not 38, right? We're
Yeah,
talking about two of the most expensive cities in the world. But in a place like Des Moines, the number for a first time home buyer is 26,
sure.
right? And that tells you a little bit of what is the baseline? How do we help Gen X think about these things? And why it's interesting to me, it also gets back to what you talked about in the type of dwelling that's going to be required for first time home buying. Are people willing to share a wall versus a 1,500 square foot,
Mm-hmm.
you know, detached home with a garage on it? These are the choices that unfortunately have to be made because rising construction costs, the scalability of some of these things. And it gets back to a lot of the work that you and I are passionate about
Yeah.
with the convergence program, which I give a huge applause to the MBA
Yes. And you're very active in the MBA, and that's an amazing program.
right. But that's getting more shovels in the ground here. I really do believe in working through that nitty gritty
Mm-hmm.
work that has to be done at the local. But I'd really, really recommend that we keep talking to young people about what they want and
Yeah.
how they want to live because I think it can get quite creative here, particularly in the AI world of how to configure some of these neighborhoods and homes and get more people into their first place.
So my first home was a townhouse. I did not have an attached garage. And I don't want to be the guy shaking his finger saying in my day, but the fact is that townhomes are still a big part of the market. I don't quite understand why they're not bigger. I don't know
Yeah.
if you do, but it's a great opportunity for a first-time home buyer because you build equity.
Yeah, it's also interesting. I think there's something happening in the world in some pockets of the demographics because you can't look at things, but sometimes simplicity in your first place is actually quite a nice place. And you just have to look at some other cities in the world that are highly populated and they've come up with real, you have to just take a look at Tokyo as an example,
Sure.
in certain areas and what you would think about as your first owned apartment or condominium. And I think there's a lot we can learn about how humans, depending on where they want to live, what's possible.
Of all the homes I've owned and rented over the years, that first house definitely holds a special place in my heart. And I'm still friends with the family who lived next door.
Yeah. Well, it was probably one of my worst moves because Toronto's real estate in downtown
Hmm.
Toronto, that was the first place I should have just held it,
Yeah,
right? I should have gone
I hear
long.
you.
Should have gone
Gone
long,
long.
but at that point I wasn't in the situation to own two properties, but I wish I did.
Right. So let's talk internationally for a minute, and then I want to do dive into AI because it's so important. You're in countries all over the world. You see data from all over the world. What's your sense of, when we think about the U.S. housing market, what are the most important advantages that we have here? And what are you seeing elsewhere that when you look at it, you should say, we should really do that here. I don't know why we don't do that.
Yeah. While the data in the United States is not as accessible as we would all like for all types of
Hmm.
property, be it multifamily, be it single
Mm-hmm.
family, be it commercial, there is a lot of it in this country. And now I don't want to jump to the AI point of this, but I actually think we are very, very fortunate to have as much access, not just from Cotality, by the way, because a lot of even clients can go direct and do a lot of these things. So there's a lot to play with here. And in some other markets around the world, I think you can take these things for granted because there's some markets in the world. I will give you an example. In certain markets, even getting good access to listing information, like when we talk about how many homes are listed in a given day or week, they don't have that at their fingertips for regulation. They don't have it to run their business because there's not quite the ecosystem around what has been built, let's call it in the organized real estate world here.
Interesting.
Because you have to remember, MLSs are only available in 2 countries in the world, really. There's a few, but this is a North America, just like the capital market system is unique in the United States, only place in the world with the secondary market that I know of. There might be a couple other I might be missing, but it was not common in Canada. Banks held capital on their balance sheet, same in Switzerland, same in the UK. But this concept of having all this real estate information in and accessible to people is quite unique, by the way. So that gives you an example, because lots of information comes from insurance, from real estate, from the banking sector, from public record information. We have a lot to play with here. And that's probably what I say is our opportunity here, is to turn that into decisions, not just insight. So that's there. I think what's interesting in a market like the UK.
Wait, I have to write that down. Decisions and not just insight. Okay, that's a keeper.
I've been told not to use triple D for I don't know why, but it's data-driven decisions, not data-driven insight to me, because our job is to give professionals confidence to make a decision, a high-risk decision, or even a marketing decision that some people call low risk. I call that a big risk decision because those are marketing dollars you need to put at work, right? So, but data-driven decisions as opposed to just insights to me are quite fundamental to, I think, how we have to move and what the new technology can give us, by the way, as we think about those things, right?
So let's talk about that new technology. It's
one thing
growing exponentially.
Say, though, David, before I come back.
Yeah, please.
You know, the word climate and climate change, or housing resiliency and adaptation, I'm finding deeper and more interesting conversations between, there's great ones here in the United States, but I'm finding deeper and greater ones there between regulators, property owners, energy companies. There's a whole ecosystem thinking about how do you make housing stock either more efficient because of electricity or more resilient over time, and lower the cost of total ownership for the housing stock in the UK and Australia, by the way. So if I had to say one area that we're spending more time on than we are, we're doing great work in the United States, don't get me wrong, but we are probably double, triple, and quadruple clicking because we see the momentum about, you just think of the housing stock in the UK and, you know, the boiler systems, the age of those homes, it affects people's lives, their health, all those kinds of things. It's actually quite interesting work. And that's why we've been able to really work with a company, and then now we've acquired them, to really look at the energy efficiency of all 37 million properties in the UK, to really understand their energy usage, and then come up. The more interesting thing is, what remedies can you put in to lower those costs for all? Super interesting work. But and I'm hoping
there's a strong undertow of denial in this country around climate issues, and in some ways I think it's expected, and in other ways it really puts us in a difficult position competitively.
But if you think about it as more housing resiliency and adaptation, you know, this is an asset class, right? So if you think about managing risk and resiliency and adaptation, that's really what it's about, right? Where we are. So
AI, data is really the foundation of good AI. It's the lifeblood, literally, of AI. And then in real estate, I think it's particularly valuable. We are all in on AI. We're a small nonprofit. Everyone is getting trained on AI. We use a number of different systems. I think the applications of it are really beyond our imagination right now. You are at the heart of the leading edge of what's happening here. Tell me a little bit about what you're thinking about AI, both at Cotality, and how should the rest of us in real estate and community development be thinking about it?
The number one word I would use is opportunity, first
Mm-hmm.
off. I think it's a huge opportunity for our industry together because connecting information and making it useful, the technology and the compute that's available now to us as players in this market, we didn't have this opportunity, honestly, David, even 5 years ago versus what we have sitting in front of us right now. So that's number one. Number two is, well, it's actually number one. I do think this concept of responsible
Mm-hmm.
AI is something that we all have to take extremely seriously, given the size of the decisions that all of us need to make. Not that any decision should be taken lightly, but we are talking about people's homes
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
the end of the day and the prospect of homes. So that is one area that we did to take a big step back. We've been in the AI game for a while, but particularly now when the first generative AI models came out. So we were doing deep learning and traditional AI with bots. A lot of companies have been, right, to just get efficient, get accurate, do it that way. But
Sure.
something was different when the LLMs hit. And so we've been putting quite a bit of time because obviously a lot of the services we provide need to be regulated. People are underwriting risk in insurance, banking, real estate around a lot of what we do. So not that everyone does, but that's really been helpful. So our AI council is made up of product leaders, our best legal professionals, our best compliance professionals across the company. So that's number one. Number two is actually this concept of making sure your data, be it Cotalities or any companies, is
Mm-hmm.
treated truly like an enterprise asset and not just data exhaust. And you don't have to be a data company to really think about your data as truly an asset, just like your people, just like your buildings, just no matter what you're doing. And I think there needs to be that mindset and there's a lot of companies have done that if they have really great information, but that's how you procure that information. That's how you make sure it's clean, coded. So you can imagine with our 22,000 we have 22,000 different supply chains that
Yeah.
all have very rigorous governance, data ingestion protocols because AI is really about making machines smart at its most
Right.
simplest term.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to feed those machines with the best quality data that you can, and that's why that's so important. And so we spent a lot of time here talking about how do you turn a truth set, because we used to call it a truth set,
Mm-hmm.
like, and there's other companies that have it, but we've been really spending a lot of time. But how do you turn it into a training set that's AI ready? That pivot needs to be there. And I think a lot of companies have this opportunity, even with their own content, because if you want to have the models work, so once you have the data and you've done those things, it is actually just getting to it and actually giving, like you're doing on Perplexity. I'm not sure if you're on Pro. I'm a Perplexity
Oh yeah.
Pro.
No, I use Pro and we use Chat GPT 40.
Yeah, I'm a fanatic. That is
Yep.
that is the way I work right now, and that's just for my search capabilities.
Yeah. I love it because it sources so well.
Yeah, and I love the sourcing because again,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at it,
You can dive down those sources and learn all kinds of things and find articles I'd never read.
yeah. I actually think everyone should use Pro, by the way, because even their
Mm-hmm.
generic version, you don't quite get to the same sourcing
Yeah.
levels as you get on Pro, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's well
But
worth it.
but the next piece is what we call Core AI, and that's the recipe of making information
Right.
usable in the LLMs properly. And I don't want to get through too much jargon, but building out a proper semantic layer around the data, because the data actually can be turned into a narrative. That's hence the word semantic. And that is going to really help these machines really think about, particularly as
Right.
you're building insights and answers. So that's the next level that gets there. And then really coming up with practical use cases is the third one to help. What we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to work on,
Mm-hmm.
David, is just what's practical. What is taking people's time that's routine, mundane, and repeatable?
Yeah.
And we have about 20 of these that we're working on, some in real estate, some in mortgage, some in insurance. We're working with users of our software and saying, how do we get the stopwatch out? And if it took you an hour, how do you now get it done in 10 minutes? And how do
Mm-hmm.
we build that into our systems? Because in this business, minutes can equal millions if you look at the size of some of these things that we're working on. So hopefully that gives you a view of how that's our philosophy around AI is responsible, make sure it's a training set that we could put our name on, make it AI ready with our core AI recipe, and then deliver that to our clients through our software or their systems. That's kind of how we're approaching it, but with a really end user focus, if you know what I mean. We were just at our residential conference. We've just launched this as one of our products.
Mm-hmm.
A real estate agent right now takes about an hour and 15 minutes to actually do a listing when they have to list your property and put the nice photos together,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
right? And so you can imagine now with the system that we've built, because we have 1 million agents that work on our system every day, that is now possible in less than 4.5 minutes.
I believe it.
With the photos, with the descriptions, would you like it in 12 languages? Would you like it in one language? Actually, even the language is down to the local dialect in Louisiana versus
Yes.
how you want to communicate in New York City. It's pretty interesting stuff, actually.
It definitely is. And I love how you talk about what we do with the data, how the data is communicated to us, because, I said data is the lifeblood of AI, and you got a lot of blood, man. It's 5.5 billion property records over 50 years. That's a lot of data. So that's great, but it's also a challenge, right?
Yeah, no, it is taking care of that and making sure we take care of every 1 and 0 is something I talk to my team about.
Yeah.
And those people that are in our enterprise data group, it is so important because it is going to be the thing and we want to collect, we call it Property 360, but there's a lot of other information, Cotality. I think we're only halfway there because there's a lot of other information that we could put into this to really help our client base across all end markets that we serve just do better work and be faster. Our mission is to help the industry be faster, smarter, and more people-centric. So this fits in beautifully with what we're trying to do.
Faster, smarter, and more people-centric. I think that's a pretty good formula for all of us. Let me ask you one thing, because I always like people to get to know my guests a little better. And tell me something interesting about yourself that has absolutely nothing to do with your work.
Well, I already mentioned I'm a Canadian.
Yes. And I'm from Detroit, so we love Canadians in Detroit.
What some people are somewhat surprised at sometimes, it probably does have an effect on my work in some way, because I don't think there's a real separation between life and work, by the way. It's just not how I operate. But my parents immigrated to Canada with my brother and sister from India.
Oh, interesting.
So both families, but I was born in Toronto, Canada, and raised as a Canadian in Toronto, Canada. And the second piece of it is I happened to marry my lovely wife for 28 years, who I met at university in Canada, but she's a Swede. And my family has actually got 3 passports because they have Swedish, Canadian, and now Swiss, because that's where we raised our kids.
Yeah, yeah.
And I only have 2 passports because I'm a Canadian and a Swedish citizen now. So, and did not quite get my Swiss yet. But that's not that many people know that about, my background.
I love that. No wonder you're in a company with offices all over the world. There may be a blue passport in your future.
It's pretty nice down here in Southern Cal.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I knew I was going to learn a lot. You exceeded my expectations. I hope other people feel the same way. And it's an exciting time. It's scary, but it's also exciting.
I actually think when you really look at, we are through the housing recession in my view, right? If you really think about the 3 or 4 years. So if you just have to think about 26 to 36 time frame, and when you think of what we have as an industry, be it insurance, be it residential real estate, anyone who's interested in property, I think it's an incredible time. As long as we embrace all the new technology and tools and we stay very close. Even though we're a B2B company, I'm a big believer that you really need to stay very close to the consumer.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Thank you, Pat. I really appreciate your time, and it's great being schooled.
Appreciate it. I hope I didn't feel like I was schooling you, David.
Well, I like it, so I wouldn't even be able to judge that. I learned a lot. That's all I know. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to this edition of Beyond Four Walls. You can visit the National Housing Conference at nhc.org. There you can learn more about affordable housing policies, affordability challenges throughout the nation on our Paycheck to Paycheck database, and explore membership in NHC for you or your organization. We appreciate your interest and look forward to working with you in the future. Until next time, I'm David Dworkin, NHC's President and CEO, wishing you a great day.